Okay, so today just going to talk about The Flash by Mark Waid, trade paperbacks. Currently there are 7 of these, collecting his run that started in 1990. And it's pretty comprehensive set of books. They collect everything from the Flash annuals to the Flash specials, plus the issues he did of the regular series. And I just want to talk about Mark Waid era of the Flash because he's written the book on and off for a while, specifically during the Wally West series. He's got an introduction in the first book here. And his stories range from great to good to not so good. His first foray into the Flash started with the Flash Special #1, which was a 50th anniversary celebration, which introduced the John Fox Flash, which he created, which was named after John Broome and Gardner Fox. But when he became the regular writer on Flash, he took over after William Messner Loebs with a story called Flash Year 1 Born to Run. And that was really what kind of put the book back on the map, because up to that point, sales on the book had not been doing all that well. And in the 1990s, it was, the death of Superman had just happened, and Batman had his back broken and all this kind of stuff, and comics were getting into the grim and gritty era pretty heavily. And then Mark Waid came along on The Flash, and it kind of brought a bit of hope and optimism back to comic books. And it started with the Year 1 storyline, which is a 4-part bi-weekly story that shows Wally West getting superpowers and becoming Kid Flash under Barry Allen. And some great artwork by Greg LaRocque. And it really was like a breath of fresh air on the title at the time, because I was reading Flash back then because Wally was my favorite character. And it was just like you could feel the shift in the title. It felt like more like classic comic books, because William Messner Loeb's run was more about politics and social messaging and all this kind of stuff. And Waid kind of brought it back to just superheroes and optimism and fun, and brought back a lot of the old villains again. Abracadabra makes a return appearance here in this volume. And by the time he got to his first real big story arc, which was the Return of Barry Allen saga, he kind of changed the game for a lot of what was going on in terms of the Flash universe. Because at this point, Barry Allen in the original DC continuity had died during Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Wally had replaced him. And the return of Barry Allen was kind of a shock to everyone. Volume 2 of this series is where the Return of Barry Allen story is located, and it does have some issues of Green Lantern in here as well by Gerard Jones, which I know is cause of concern for some people because of the charges that were put against him, which I'm not going to get into here. But it's in there as well, just for completion. But this is where in my opinion, the best Flash story of all time, The Return of Barry Allen, starts out. And Barry Allen comes back from the dead, quote unquote. I love that panel there. And Wally has to deal with it because Barry Allen is not the same Barry Allen that he remembers. Not to spoil the surprise for anyone, but things don't exactly go all that well for the Flash family. But the storyline does bring Wally back to his pre-crisis speed, and it makes Wally the one true Flash, if you can say that, because there's been a lot of Flashes towards the end of the storyline. The thing with this volume is that there's a couple of issues of Green Lantern that kind of pop in here, and the Flash Annual number 6, which drops about halfway through the Return of Barry Allen saga, which kind of interrupts the flow because it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with that particular storyline. Just the introduction of Argus during the Bloodlines crossover event. So you have to be wary of that. But again, the Return of Barry Allen saga itself is the best Flash story ever, in my opinion. Volume 3 starts off with the Back on Track storyline, which introduces Mike Wieringo, who sadly has passed away since. But Mike became the new Flash artist for a while. And when I first read the stories back in the day, when I was reading these single issues, I wasn't fond of his artwork at first. It took me a while to really adjust to it. But he really grew on me after a while. And the story itself is pretty fun. Team up with Nightwing and Starfire against a new villain called the Combine. And then it goes on to... I love this bit here too, and that's pretty cool. And then it goes on to another storyline, which by fans at the time was called The Trial of Wally West, in which a new villain called Razor ends up damaging a mall, and a lady gets hurt. That's Razor there. It's pretty cool looking. And the Flash fails to save a young woman who ends up getting disfigured and paralyzed. And it turns out that she ends up suing the Flash for damages. And of course, it's all a plot by one of the Flash's villains. One thing I will say about Mark Waid's run on this, like again, it's a pretty good story. It's not not my favorite, but it's pretty good for what it is. But it's kind of where his, I don't know if you call it an obsession, but it's where his love affair with Abracadabra really begins, because Mark Waid, one of the complaints about his run is that he kind of overuses Abracadabra a lot during his stories, or at least in my opinion, that's the way it felt back in the day. And this volume 3, also introduces Bart Allen, aka Impulse, during the Reckless Youth storyline. Bart Allen is the grandson of Barry Allen, who comes from the 30th century, because before Crisis on Infinite Earths, Barry was sent to the 30th century to live with Iris, which is where she's originally from, Iris West, his wife. And they had kids, Don and Don Allen, the Tornado Twins. And the son, Don Allen, kind of weird how they both sound the same. His son, Bart, became Impulse and later became the Fourth Flash, which I'm not going to get into right now. Book 4 is the Terminal Velocity Saga, plus the aftermath of that. I should show you the back of this as well, I guess. Which collects Flash number 0, Flash number 95 to 105, and Flash Annual number 8, which is a year 1 type story. And this is another really good Flash saga, if you will, in which Wally discovers the Speed Force for the first time, because it is basically counting down to his death, if you want to call it that, or he thought it was going to be his death. Most people know by now, of course, that he didn't die, and that he discovers the Speed Force, which is the first time that is ever actually mentioned by name in a storyline. There were hints about it, and people had kind of passed on the idea, or I guess mentioned the notion that Barry Allen, when he died, had gone to a kind of higher plane of existence, but nobody put a name on it before. And this is what really kind of cemented the Speed Force as the source of power for all the speedsters, not just the Flash, but guys like Max Mercury and Jesse Quick and all those folks. And of course, after this, between sagas, between Terminal Velocity and the next saga, Dead Heat, There are some issues that are, they're not bad. They're just kind of sort of fill-in adventures, really. 1 or 2 issue adventures that kind of deal with soap opera elements of Wally and Linda's relationship. Then have kind of random villains show up, like Mongol from Superman shows up, and werewolves and Mirror Master, that sort of thing. And then Volume 5, we get 2 back-to-back sort of sagas, which is the Dead Heat and Race Against Time crossover event, which was the first and only Flash crossover event that took place between 2 Flash-related titles, because there was a Impulse book at the time as well, so it crossed over with a couple of issues of Impulse. So this starts off with the return of Magenta, who was Wally's ex-girlfriend, Frances Kane. And there's a team-up with Captain Marvel during the Underworld Unleashed crossover event. And then you get to Dead Heat, which is the first appearance of Savitar, which is a villain who had been lost in the Speed Force for, I think, a couple of decades at this point. He comes before Jay Garrick and Barry Allen in the timeline, and that I think he was a pilot in the 40s or 1950s. And you can see here that it crosses over into the Impulse book at the time. And this is a pretty big event at the time, because it did lead to the death of a Golden Age character. It's kind of weird how they put that in there, but it was a fairly significant event, and it led into another storyline called Race Against Time, which had the John Fox of the future, or the Flash of the future, John Fox, sorry, come back in time and try to seduce or try to win the heart of Wally's girlfriend, Linda Park. That's John Fox there. And, he's kind of inexperienced as a hero, and he knows that something bad has happened to Wally, but he doesn't tell Linda, and he's trying to sever her connection to Wally so that he can move in on to her. And here are the Tornado Twins, Don and Don Allen. Because during this time, Wally's basically bouncing through time. He's been in the 27th century, he goes through the 30th century, he's kind of all over the place until he can get back to the right era. And then he has to deal with all the mistakes that John Fox has made during his absence. And this was kind of like really the last big saga that Mark Waid did that I really liked. Actually, that's not true. I'll get into that later. But after the Race Against Time arc, things kind of petered out in Waid's run, I felt like, because he did a lot of stories. Most of them, and some of them are in here in Volume 6, that are not really quite as epic, and they don't really feel as impressive as some of his earlier Flash stories. It's more kind of, again, just soap opera elements, which is not a bad thing, I guess, in terms of the relationship between Wally and Linda, but in terms of exciting stories, there wasn't really much to go by here. There's a Flash plus Nightwing book included in here, and there's a return of the Pied Piper, and there's a 3-part story with Neron from Underworld Unleashed. There's a city where Wally moves to, I think it's Santa Monica, California, because he fights with supervillains and causes too much damage to Keystone City. And it feels like Waid is just kind of treading water here. Wally doesn't really feel like he's moving forward as a character, and there's nothing really all that exciting happening in the book. It's just kind of standard superhero fare that would usually be like a fill-in type of stuff. So it's not that it's overly bad, but it's not a great run of stories here in this volume. The art is pretty good, I'll give you that. That's, I think it's Paul Ryan is the name of the artist here. Yeah, Paul Ryan. So it's got some interesting points to it, and it's great art. And the Flash, Green Lantern, Prestige format two-parter, Faster Friends is in here as well, which is kind of nice to have it in one volume there. But Waid leaves the Flash at this point for about a year, and then Grant Morrison and Mark Millar take over for about 12 issues. And I won't really get into that, but they took over for a year just to give Mark Waid a break, and then Mark Waid came back with what is probably one of my least favorite Flash stories of all time, which is Chain Lightning, because it introduces, this is a new volume by the way, volume 7, or book 7. It introduces Cobalt Blue, who, if you don't know, is the evil twin brother of Barry Allen, which was, it's like the oldest and worst trope in comic book and soap opera history, right there. You know, the evil twin brother who was hidden at birth, and the life story of the Flash is in here as well, which is where he really planted the seeds for that storyline. It says here, Barry Allen, one of twins, was born in the small town of Fallville, Iowa, on May 13th. If you ever want to know Barry Allen's birthday, is May 13th. But yeah, it leads into the Chain Lightning event, which, you know, it introduces a lot of cool future Flashes, but they're all related to Barry Allen. Like, there's nothing aside from John Fox and the Iris West character from Kingdom Come, which is the Kid Flash of the Kingdom Come universe. All the characters are descendants of Barry Allen, or all the future Flashes are, which means that Wally didn't really contribute much to the Flash legacy, which kind of pissed me off at the time. And the artwork in some of these stories by Pop Mahan is just, I'm sorry, but it's just bad. It's just horrible to look at. It's like, but yeah, Chain Lightning and the Cobalt Blue storyline was probably my least favorite Flash story because of just how it just felt like it was a tired cliche, and it made Impulse, Bart Allen, the grandson of, or the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson of Barry Allen, and his mother was the great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of his grandfather's brother. So basically his mother and his father, Bart's mother and father, were kind of long distance cousins. But Chain Lightning had some good stuff in terms of the art by Paul Pellisher. And it did have some cool visual designs for some of the future Flashes. As you can see some of them here, like Seal Allen and Jace Allen. I kind of really dig that helmet there that he has and the outfit he has. That's a cool design. And this led into the Dark Flash saga. That's another future Flash there. Looks pretty cool. And there's a Kingdom Come Flash with Jay Garrick. But this story itself was, it just felt like kind of a mess, and it, you know, Waid's run started it pretty good with the Born to Run saga and the Return of Barry Allen saga, Dead Heat, Terminal Velocity, Race Against Time. Those were all great, and then you get something like this, which, while the art is great, the story itself was just kind of unnecessary. At least that's the way it felt to me at the time. Not that he wasn't cool seeing the future Flashes, but again, the whole evil twin thing just kind of put me off. And it culminated in Flash number 150, with Barry trying to go, or with Wally going back in time to try and save Barry Allen, and then causing the Anti-Monitor to win the Crisis on Infinite Earths. But this led into the Dark Flash saga, which was pretty good. Lasted, and that'll be in volume 8, which should include the Dark Flash saga, All Flash number 1, and I think the Wild Wests, because Waid came back a few years later to the Flash after Jeff Johns had left, and did this storyline, which was the Wild West, in which Wally and Linda and their 2 kids, Jana and Iris, come back from another dimension, and they try to get used to life as a family in the DC universe. And this was kind of a mediocre story. Like, I like the kids. Some people hate Wally's kids, but I kind of like them, even though the powers, Jay's powers, at least didn't make really a whole lot of sense, because he could get super strong and then increase his muscle mass, which is kind of weird for a guy that's a descendant of the Flash. But Waid left again after, I think it was 6 issues of this, when the title was kind of relaunched, or soft relaunched. And then, not too long after, the title was canceled again for the second time. So Mark Waid's run, like I said, it ranges from the really great stuff early on to some not so great stories, or at least some mediocre stories in my opinion. As his Flash stories head towards the end of his run, or the end of his era. But overall, like I said, he's mostly remembered for the good stuff, you know, the Return of Barry Allen saga, the Race Against Time, Dead Heat, all that stuff. Those are the big ones. But all in all, check them out. Like I said, there is a lot of good stuff in here. There's a lot of content. So the Flash by Mark Waid. Yeah, there's 7 volumes right now, and you're probably looking at an 8th volume coming out. I would say probably next year at this rate, because of the whole coronavirus thing. But yeah, check them out, man. There's a lot of good stuff in here, despite the, like I said, you can probably just skip volume 6 altogether, and maybe even volume 7. But other than that, man, there's a lot of good stories here, for any Flash fan. So if you like this video, click the like button, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. And hopefully I'll get around to doing a video of The Flash by Jeff Johns review pretty soon.